The diner smelled like coffee and grilled cheese, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes no matter how many times you washed them. Talia had long stopped noticing. It was home in the way places became home when you had nowhere else to go. She moved between tables, balancing plates, refilling coffee, slipping in and out of conversations like a ghost. "Order up." Rex, the cook, shouted from the pass. She grabbed the plate, a burger and fries for table 6, while checking her watch. Oren would be asleep by now, curled up in bed with the stuffed dinosaur she'd patched up too many times. She hated missing bedtime, but tips had been good tonight, and the rent wasn't going to pay itself. Dorian Vale was in his usual booth near the window, nursing a cup of black coffee. He always came late, after the dinner rush, dressed in tailored suits that didn't belong in a place where the vinyl seats were cracked and the jukebox had been broken for a decade. He never asked for much, just coffee, sometimes pie, always left a tip so generous she wondered if he did it out of pity. He was quiet, a man who listened more than he spoke, who observed without intruding. She wasn't sure if that made him thoughtful or unsettling. As she passed by, his voice cut through the hum of the diner. "Talia." She stopped, balancing the plate on her hand. He had never used her name before. He only knew it because of her name tag, but the way he said it sounded deliberate, like he had been holding onto it for a while. He gestured to the seat across from him. "Can you sit for a moment?" She glanced around. 2 tables needed refills, and the check at the counter was waiting to be rung up. "I'm working. I'll make it worth your time." The words unsettled her. She had dealt with men who thought money gave them the right to say anything. Dorian never struck her as one of them, but she knew better than to trust instincts alone. Still, curiosity got the best of her. She slid into the seat, keeping her back straight, arms crossed. "What's this about?" He took a measured sip of coffee before answering. "I have a business proposition for you." Her guard went up instantly. "If this is about investing in some new startup, It's not that kind of proposition." His lips twitched, amused, before he leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to make it feel conspiratorial. "I need a wife." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "For one night," he clarified. "It's a formality. A business function. I need someone to play the role, and I think you'd be perfect." Talia laughed, loud and sharp, before realizing he wasn't joking. He watched her with that same quiet intensity, waiting for her to catch up. "This is a joke, right?" "No." She stared at him. He was serious. He wanted her, a waitress from a rundown diner, to be his wife, even for pretend. It was absurd. She pushed back against the seat, folding her arms tighter. "You do realize there are, I don't know, agencies for this sort of thing?" "Why ask me?" "Because you don't belong in my world." She frowned. "That's not an answer." "It's the truth," he said simply. "A woman from my social circle would ask questions. She'd want something in return." "You won't." She scoffed. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." He sounded so sure, so unwavering. "I've been watching you, Talia. I know you don't have time for distractions. I know every decision you make is for your son. You're not interested in games or social climbing. That makes you ideal." Her stomach twisted. It should have been creepy, but it wasn't. It was calculated. He had been studying her like a chess piece, weighing her every move, every habit. She didn't know what was worse, that he had done it or that he was right. "Look, I appreciate the offer. But I'm not someone you can just hire to be on your arm for a night. I'd pay you." That hit her like a slap. She hated the way her brain immediately did the math. Rent, groceries, Oren's tuition. She didn't even know how much he was offering, and it already felt dangerous. She shook her head. I'm not interested. Dorian leaned back, unfazed. You haven't heard the amount. It doesn't matter. He tilted his head, studying her again. Are you sure? She hesitated, just for a second. He saw it. He didn't push, just let the silence stretch between them. She swallowed. Why me, really? Something flickered in his eyes, something unreadable. Because I know you won't fall in love with me. She barked out a laugh. Wow. Arrogant, much? Not at all, he said smoothly. It's just an observation. She shook her head. You're insane. Some would say ambitious. He slid a crisp $100 bill across the table, enough to cover her shift. Take a break. Think about it. She stared at the money, at him, at the way he was completely unbothered by the ridiculousness of what he was proposing. Talia had spent her whole life clawing her way through survival. Nothing came easy. There was always a catch. She exhaled sharply, standing. Enjoy your coffee, Dorian. She left the money on the table. Then she laughed, a sharp, involuntary sound that filled the quiet space between them. Dorian didn't so much as blink. He sat there, composed as ever, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of his coffee cup, waiting for her to catch up. You're serious? She asked, still half smiling, waiting for the punchline. Completely. She shook her head. You want me to play your wife for a night? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. It's a business arrangement. She scoffed. A business arrangement where I pretend to be married to you? Yes. Talia leaned forward, resting her elbows on the sticky tabletop. You do realize there are professionals for this sort of thing? People who do this for a living? Dorian's mouth curved slightly, almost amused. Yes. But professionals come with expectations. You don't. She frowned. What's that supposed to mean? You don't want anything from me. His tone was matter of fact, like he had studied her down to her DNA. You're not looking for a relationship. You have no interest in wealth or status. And most importantly, you don't have time for nonsense. You'll play the role, take the money, and walk away. The sheer audacity of him nearly made her laugh again, but then he added, $20,000. The words landed like a punch. She inhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the table. You're offering me 20 grand to go to a party? Yes. That's more than I make in a year. I know. She stared at him, waiting for him to flinch, to smile, to do anything that suggested he wasn't a completely unhinged billionaire throwing money at a random waitress. But he was calm. Completely still. And all I have to do is be your wife for a few hours? Yes. She leaned back, exhaling slowly. What's the catch? There is no catch. Bull. Dorian tilted his head, watching her carefully. It's exactly what I said. You accompany me to the event, play the part, and in return, you get financial security for your son. Her stomach twisted. She hated that he had brought Oren into this, even indirectly. Dorian reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. This is the contract. She eyed it warily before flipping it open. There were multiple pages, dense paragraphs of legalese. Attached were more documents, NDAs, address allowance, an itinerary of the evening, instructions on behavior, lists of guests. This is a lot for one night, she muttered. He took a sip of coffee. I like to be thorough. She skimmed through, trying to focus, but Dorian kept talking, outlining details about the event, the high-profile guests, the expectations, the importance of a convincing performance. The words blurred together, a whirlwind of exclusivity, power, and control. The contract felt heavier in her hands. She wasn't stupid. She knew this was ridiculous. But 20 grand was 20 grand. That was months of rent, groceries, tuition, the kind of financial cushion she never had. Dorian watched her with quiet patience, waiting. She swallowed hard. You swear this is just business? Yes. No expectations? None. She hesitated. Then, before she could overthink, she grabbed the pen and signed. The next morning, Talia stood in the middle of a designer boutique that smelled like money. Dorian sat in a sleek leather chair, legs crossed, watching as a consultant draped a silk gown over Talia's arm. This one's nice, the woman said cheerfully. Classic, elegant. Talia eyed the price tag and nearly fainted. Dorian, unimpressed, glanced at it once before shaking his head. Something better. Better? It was already worth more than her car. The consultant smiled and whisked the dress away, returning with a shimmering midnight blue gown that looked like it belonged on royalty. Talia sighed, running her fingers over the delicate fabric. You know I'm just wearing this for one night, right? Exactly. She rolled her eyes but allowed herself to be ushered into the fitting room. The dress slid over her skin like water, hugging her frame in a way that made her feel different. Not like a diner waitress, not like a struggling single mom. Like someone else entirely. When she stepped out, Dorian lifted his gaze from his phone. His eyes flickered over her, unreadable. That will do, he said, standing. The consultant beamed, already calculating her commission. Talia, however, still felt like she was waiting for reality to kick in. On the way out, Dorian glanced at her. You should get ready at my estate. She stiffened. Excuse me? It's more practical, he said smoothly. We'll leave together. It sells the image if anyone's watching. Her instincts bristled. I can get ready at home. Dorian was unfazed. And what about Oren? She tensed. The event will run late, he continued. It would be easier if he stayed at my home with a nanny. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. She clenched her jaw. I don't leave my son with strangers. Then bring him, Dorian said simply. You can meet the nanny, approve everything. He'll have his own space. Toys, movies, anything he needs. Talia chewed her lip. It was a practical solution. And the thought of Oren in a safe place, well taken care of, without her scrambling for a last-minute sitter. She exhaled sharply. Fine. Dorian smiled. Good. Something in her gut told her this was all too smooth, too convenient. But the money was real. The contract was signed. And now, there was no going back. The ballroom shimmered with gold accents and crystal chandeliers, the kind of place that didn't just look expensive, it felt expensive. Every surface gleamed, every corner meticulously designed to exude wealth. Talia had never been anywhere like this. Even the air smelled different, a mix of fresh roses and something richer, like money itself had a scent. She moved carefully, hyper-aware of the silk dress brushing against her legs. The gown fit her like a dream, but she still felt like an imposter, as if someone would tap her on the shoulder at any moment and ask who let the waitress in. Dorian, however, was perfectly at ease. He stood beside her, sharp in a black tuxedo, effortlessly commanding the room. He introduced her with a touch to the small of her back, always composed, always charming. My wife, Talia. Each time, the words sent a strange jolt through her. She had been prepared for skepticism, for someone to call out the absurdity of it all. But no one did. They smiled, they nodded, they accepted her presence as though she belonged. You are absolutely stunning, a woman rexed, gripping Talia's hand with both of hers. Her dress was sleek, understated, the kind of effortless elegance that screamed old money. "Dorian, you never told us your wife was such a beauty." Dorian smiled, smooth and unreadable. "She has many surprises." Talia played along, smiling warmly. "He doesn't like to share too much." The woman laughed, delighted, and Dorian's grip on her waist tightened slightly, just enough for her to notice. As the evening unfolded, the initial nerves melted away. Champagne flowed, music played, conversations blurred together in a haze of polite laughter and calculated compliments. Talia found herself slipping into the role with surprising ease. She met CEOs, politicians, celebrities, all of them charmed by her warmth, her quick wit. She had spent years surviving on tips, navigating difficult customers with a smile. This wasn't so different. At one point, Dorian leaned in, his voice low near her ear. "You're a natural." She smirked, lifting her champagne glass. "You expected me to fail?" "Not at all," he murmured. "I wouldn't have chosen you if I had." The words sent an unfamiliar thrill through her, one she quickly ignored. This was just a job. A temporary role in a world she didn't belong in. And yet, as the night stretched on, she found herself enjoying it. She had never been part of something like this, never been someone people looked at with admiration instead of pity. For a few hours, she wasn't a struggling single mother scraping by on diner wages. She was Talia Vale, the elegant wife of a billionaire, sipping champagne and discussing art she had never seen in person. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, to lean into the fantasy. Oren was safe at the mansion, probably in heaven with all the new toys and the massive screen playing his favorite cartoons. Nothing bad would happen if she let go, just for a little while. She didn't even realize how much time had passed until Dorian's hand brushed against the curve of her waist again, guiding her subtly toward the exit. "Let's go," he murmured. She blinked, slightly dazed. "Already? It's late." She glanced around, surprised to find the crowd thinning. Somewhere between introductions and endless glasses of champagne, the night had slipped away. Outside, the air was cool, crisp against her skin as they stepped into the waiting car. The ride was quiet, the hum of the engine the only sound between them. Dorian sat beside her, perfectly composed, as if the entire night had required no effort at all. Talia, on the other hand, could feel the exhaustion creeping in, the weight of pretending pressing down on her. She let her head fall back against the seat, exhaling. That was surreal. Dorian glanced at her. "Tired?" She let out a soft laugh. "Exhausted." He nodded, as if he had expected that. "Then you should stay." She turned to him, brows furrowing. "What?" "At the estate. Oren's already asleep. Waking him up to leave doesn't make sense." Talia hesitated. She hadn't planned on staying. The deal was one night, one event. Dorian watched her carefully, waiting. "It's just a guest room." The rational part of her knew he was right. Oren would be comfortable, undisturbed. They could leave in the morning without issue. But something about the suggestion made her feel uneasy, like staying was crossing some invisible line. She glanced out the window, watching the city blur past. The thought of going back to her apartment, to the tiny space that barely fit the two of them, after everything she had seen tonight. She sighed, relenting. "All right. Just for tonight." Dorian didn't gloat or press further. He simply nodded, as if her agreement had been inevitable. Talia told herself it was the logical choice. Nothing more. But something in her gut told her that, somehow, nothing about this was logical at all. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the air, pulling Talia from sleep. For a few blissful seconds, she forgot where she was. The sheets were softer than anything she'd ever owned, the mattress cradling her body in a way that made it nearly impossible to move. Then reality slammed back into her. The gala. The mansion. The fact that she had fallen asleep in a place that wasn't hers. She sat up abruptly, brushing her fingers through her hair. The guest room was ridiculously elegant, muted gray tones, floor-to-ceiling windows, fresh flowers on the nightstand like she was in a five-star hotel. Oren. She needed to find Oren. Talia slipped out of bed, still in the silk nightgown a housekeeper had given her last night. She had argued, insisting on sleeping in her own clothes, but exhaustion had won. She grabbed a robe from the chair and tied it around her waist before stepping into the hall. The mansion was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that made her feel like an intruder. She followed the sound of low conversation to a bright, airy breakfast room. Dorian sat at the long glass table, casually reading the newspaper, a cup of coffee in hand. He looked entirely at ease, like this was just another morning. "Good, you're awake," he said without looking up. Talia folded her arms. "Where's Oren?" "In the sunroom with his nanny." "He's fine." She ignored the small relief that settled in her chest. "Good. Now I'm leaving." Dorian finally met her eyes, completely unbothered. "Sit down, Talia." "No, thanks." "Sit," he repeated, a thread of steel beneath the smoothness of his voice. Something in his expression made her stomach tighten. Against her better judgment, she lowered herself into a chair. A place setting was already prepared, fresh fruit, eggs, perfectly toasted bread. She ignored it. Dorian set down his coffee. "Before you go, there's something we need to discuss." "I don't think we do." "You're my wife." The words hung between them, absurd and unshakable. Talia let out a short laugh. "Excuse me?" "You're legally married to me," Dorian said evenly. Her pulse slammed against her ribs. "That's not possible." "It is." Talia shot out of her chair. "No. I didn't agree to that." He reached for a folder beside him, flipping it open. "Actually, you did." Her gaze landed on the paper, her own signature staring back at her. A knot formed in her throat. The contract. The whirlwind of documents he'd given her, the ones she had signed without reading every line. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "This has to be a mistake." "It's not." Fury surged through her. "You tricked me. I gave you paperwork. You signed it. You manipulated me. I presented an opportunity. You accepted." Her hands curled into fists. "Annul it." Dorian exhaled, as if this was mildly inconvenient instead of catastrophic. "That's not an option." "Like hell it's not." "Talia, sit down." She didn't. She wanted to launch the plate across the room, wanted to scream, wanted to wake up from whatever nightmare this was. A knock on the door interrupted them. A tall man in an expensive suit stepped inside, holding a leather briefcase. Dorian gestured to him. "This is my attorney, Silas Hale. He's here to explain the details." Talia shot Dorian a glare before turning to the lawyer. "Tell me this can be undone." Silas adjusted his glasses, looking at her with the calm detachment of a man who had seen worse reactions. "I'm afraid not." Talia clenched her jaw. "Then I'll get my own lawyer." "You're welcome to," Silas said, "but I should warn you, the prenuptial agreement is ironclad. If you contest it, you'll face breach of contract penalties." "What kind of penalties?" "Financial," Dorian answered. "Severe ones." Her stomach turned. "So, what? You sue me if I try to leave?" "If you try to break the contract, yes." "This isn't a marriage," she snapped. "It's a scam." Dorian leaned forward slightly. It's a deal. She gritted her teeth. Why? He tilted his head. I already told you. You're perfect for this role. I don't buy it. I don't need you to. Her whole body burned with anger. You think money gives you the right to do whatever you want? No, Talia, he said simply. I think strategy does. She wanted to throw something at his stupid, unreadable face. Instead, she turned to Silas. So, what? I'm just stuck here forever? No, Dorian answered before the lawyer could. You're free to leave any time you want. She stared at him, stunned. What? I won't stop you. Walk out the door if you want. She narrowed her eyes. And let you sue me into the ground? He smiled slightly. That's up to you. Her breath was shallow, her heartbeat uneven. Dorian stood, buttoning his jacket. Come with me. She didn't move. Now, Talia. Gritting her teeth, she followed him down the hall, past the grand staircase, toward a different wing of the house. He pushed open a set of double doors, revealing a room so enormous it could have been its own apartment. It wasn't just any room. It was a child's dream come to life. A massive bed covered in soft blankets. Shelves lined with books and toys. A walk-in closet stocked with tiny suits, sneakers, dress shoes. A telescope by the window. A train set running along the edge of a custom-built table. Talia's chest tightened. Dorian gestured toward the closet. Everything's his size. She swallowed. I don't. You were worried about tuition, he said. That's handled. He's already enrolled in Westfield Academy. Her breath hitched. She had looked at Westfield's website once, just to dream. The tuition had been laughably out of reach. Dorian turned to her. You can walk away. But he stays. Ice rushed through her veins. Excuse me? If you fight me, he said, I will make sure Oren has everything he needs. Stability. Education. A future. Her hands shook. You're using my son to control me? I'm giving him what you never could. Her vision blurred. This isn't a real marriage, Dorian said, his voice steady. You saw how it went last night. We're convincing. We fit. This is the arrangement, Talia. Her head spun. She didn't know what was worse, the manipulation, the entrapment, or the sickening fact that he was right. She turned toward Oren's new room, taking in the details. The warm glow of a nightlight, the soft hum of the train set running in loops. Everything he had ever wanted. Everything she had never been able to give him. She clenched her fists. Dorian watched her carefully. What's it going to be? Talia had no answer. Not yet. Dorian had never believed in luck. Luck was an illusion people relied on when they lacked the discipline to create their own success. He had learned early that the world belonged to those who planned ahead, who anticipated every possibility, who never let emotions interfere with logic. His father had drilled that into him from childhood, ensuring he understood that life was not about fairness or kindness, it was about control. By the time Dorian was 18, he had already mastered the art of negotiation. He had watched his father manipulate entire markets, acquire companies with surgical precision, and destroy competitors without a moment of hesitation. There were no ethical dilemmas in business, only winners and losers. And Dorian had no intention of ever being the latter. Harold Marlowe was the last obstacle standing between him and total dominance. The man was a legend, ruthless, sharp, untouchable. Dorian had spent years trying to break through his walls, acquiring shares in Marlowe's empire through every possible channel. But the old man was unshakable, unmoved by any offer, any pressure. Dorian had tried every tactic: direct negotiations, strategic partnerships, even aggressive takeovers through intermediaries. Every attempt had failed. And then, 6 months ago, he had stumbled upon a rumor. A whisper at a private club, half-drunken gossip between men who liked to believe they were the gatekeepers of power. Harold Marlowe had a daughter. Illegitimate. Hidden. Dorian hadn't reacted outwardly, but inside, something had clicked into place. If Marlowe had a legal heir outside of his carefully controlled legacy, it changed everything. It meant Dorian had a way in. He had started digging. The information wasn't easy to find. Marlowe had done everything possible to erase the existence of any child born outside his perfect, curated family image. But Dorian was patient. He followed every thread, every discarded lead. He traced back payments, old records, anything that might hint at the truth. Then, one night, sitting in his penthouse office, he found her. Talia Langdon. A waitress. A single mother. The daughter of a woman who had once worked as a secretary at one of Marlowe's firms before disappearing completely from high society. The timelines matched. The evidence was circumstantial, but Dorian didn't rely on assumptions. He hired investigators, obtained medical records, pieced together the fragments. She had no idea who she was. No idea the kind of power running through her veins. That was when the real plan had begun. A direct approach wouldn't work. Talia wasn't the type to be seduced by money or status. She wouldn't take the bait of a lucrative business marriage, wouldn't be swayed by promises of wealth. He had observed her long enough to know that. She was a woman who operated on survival, who made every decision through the lens of protecting her son. She didn't dream of luxury, she dreamed of security. So he had built a scenario she wouldn't be able to walk away from. It had started with small things. Frequenting the diner, learning her habits, watching how she moved through the world. She never complained, never asked for anything, but she carried exhaustion in her bones. Every dollar mattered to her. Then, the proposition. A simple, straightforward offer: one night, a fake wife, 20 grand. Just enough to make her hesitate, to make her ignore that nagging feeling in her gut that told her something wasn't right. He had overwhelmed her with details, contracts, numbers, endless logistics. He had calculated that the speed, the precision, the sheer volume of preparation would keep her from reading too deeply into what she was signing. And it had worked. Now she was his wife. Dorian had secured the one piece of leverage Harold Marlowe couldn't ignore. It was only a matter of time before the old man realized he had already lost. The mansion was always quiet in the mornings. Not the kind of quiet Talia was used to, the quiet of a cramped apartment where neighbors argued through thin walls and the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. No, this was a curated quiet, expensive and deliberate, where footsteps barely made a sound on the polished floors and the air smelled faintly of something floral she couldn't name. She woke up early, as she always did, though there was no reason to anymore. No alarm blaring in her ear, no rush to get Oren dressed, no frantic scramble to make it to the diner before the morning shift started. Just silence. The bed was too big. Too soft. She had tossed and turned half the night, tangled in Egyptian cotton sheets, feeling like a guest in her own life. The room they had given her was the size of her entire apartment, decorated in muted grays and blues, tasteful and impersonal. A hotel suite for a woman playing a role she never auditioned for. She pushed back the covers and padded barefoot to the massive window. The sun had barely risen, casting golden light over the perfectly manicured gardens. It was beautiful. It was suffocating. She threw on a sweater over her nightgown and made her way downstairs. The mansion was so large that it still took her a few seconds to remember which hallway led where. Dorian had never given her a tour. He had simply handed her the house as if that were enough. As if she'd be content wandering through it like a lost ghost. The dining room was already set, the table laid out with fresh fruit, eggs, croissants, and coffee. Everything looked like it belonged in a glossy magazine spread. A chef appeared just as she stepped inside, offering a polite nod before disappearing again. She sat down, picking up her fork, but her appetite was non-existent. It didn't matter how good the food was, something about having it appear without effort, without cost, made her stomach twist. Dorian walked in a few minutes later, already dressed in a suit, looking as perfectly composed as he always did. He poured himself a cup of coffee, taking the seat across from her without asking if she minded. "You're up early," he said. "I always am." He nodded, taking a sip of coffee. "Oren is with Noel in the sunroom. He's adjusting well." Talia forced herself to exhale slowly. Good. That was the problem. Oren was adjusting too well. He loved the estate, the new school, the endless supply of toys Dorian provided like clockwork. He wasn't questioning any of it, wasn't asking when they were going home. Dorian studied her, unreadable as always. "You haven't eaten." "Not hungry." A long pause. He didn't press, didn't demand she eat, but somehow his silence made her feel even more scrutinized. "You don't have to act like a prisoner," he finally said. She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Don't I?" He didn't react, just kept drinking his coffee. That was the worst part, he was always so measured, so collected. Never angry, never demanding. He had trapped her with paperwork and manipulation, and now he was giving her the illusion of choice. She stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "I'm going to check on Oren." Dorian didn't stop her. He never did. She found Oren in the sunroom, sitting cross-legged on a plush rug, surrounded by new toys. He looked up, grinning, holding out a tiny raptor. "Mom! Look what Dorian got me." Her throat tightened. Another gift. Another reminder that Dorian knew exactly how to keep her here. "That's cool, buddy," she said, forcing a smile. Noelle, the nanny, glanced up from her seat on the couch, smiling warmly. "He had a great morning. He's really enjoying school." Oren nodded enthusiastically. "Mom, they have a science lab. A real one. And we're going on a field trip next week to the museum." She ran a hand over his curls. "That's great, sweetheart." And it was. But it wasn't real. It wasn't theirs. Back in her room, she sat on the bed, staring at the window. The view stretched endlessly, gardens, fountains, a sky that looked too blue. She had everything she'd ever wanted for Oren. A safe home. Stability. Security. So why did she feel like she had nothing? The hardest part was that Dorian wasn't a villain. He didn't threaten her. He didn't mistreat her. He never raised his voice or made demands. He had simply set up a scenario where she couldn't leave without destroying herself in the process. She had nowhere to go. And he knew it. Dinners were the strangest part of her new life. The two of them sitting across from each other in a dining room too big, too formal. They barely spoke. Dorian never forced conversation, never pried. They ate in silence, the weight of what was unspoken filling the space between them. She studied him when he wasn't looking, trying to figure him out. He was impossible to read, always so infuriatingly composed. He never tried to be charming, never tried to win her over. He simply existed beside her, waiting. She hated that she sometimes wondered what he was thinking. One evening, after another wordless meal, she set down her fork and exhaled. "Why did you do it?" Dorian wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, unfazed. "Do what?" "Trap me in this marriage." He met her gaze, calm as ever. "I already told you." "No," she said. You told me why I was useful. That's different. He studied her for a long moment, then leaned back slightly. You would never have agreed otherwise. Her jaw clenched. That doesn't make it right. I never said it did. Something about his bluntness unsettled her more than if he had lied. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding in the quiet. Dorian had built a perfect cage. And she had no idea how to get out. The house was quiet in the late hours. Not peaceful, exactly, just still, in the way enormous places became when everyone else had gone to bed. The kind of quiet that made every sound sharper, every creak of the floorboard a reminder that someone was awake who shouldn't be. Talia wasn't sure why she was up. Maybe she had never fully adjusted to the unnatural softness of the bed, the lack of street noise outside her window, the disorienting luxury of a life she didn't choose. She padded barefoot down the hall, intending to get a glass of water, when she heard Dorian's voice. It was low but firm, carrying through the barely cracked door of his office. She hesitated, something instinctual telling her to turn back, but then she caught a name. Harold Marlowe. She stilled, pressing her back against the cool wall. Dorian's voice was measured, controlled, the way it always was when he spoke about business. His health is declining. I expect it won't be long now, maybe a few years max. Her stomach turned. Another voice responded, though she couldn't place who it was. Are the papers in order? Yes. Everything is set. Once he's gone, we move forward. She felt a sudden wave of nausea. She didn't know what disturbed her more, that Dorian spoke of a man's imminent death as if it were nothing more than a logistical hurdle, or that she had been married to him long enough to not even be surprised. The conversation continued, sharp and precise. She's the key to everything, the voice said. But she can't know yet. Dorian's response was immediate. Of course. Talia can't know until the right moment. Cold spread through her limbs, creeping into her chest. She couldn't breathe. She didn't think, just moved, pushing the door open without hesitation. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of Dorian's desk lamp. He stood behind the massive mahogany desk, phone in hand, his eyes locking onto hers the second she entered. He didn't look surprised. Call me back, he said, voice smooth, before hanging up. The air between them was thick, charged with something unspoken but heavy. What the hell was that? Her voice came out sharp, cutting through the space between them. Dorian set his phone down, his expression unreadable. You should be in bed. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Don't do that. Do what? Act like I didn't just hear you planning for a man's death like it's a business deal. He exhaled, slow and measured. You're overreacting. Talia let out a sharp laugh, disbelieving. Am I? He moved around the desk, his steps unhurried, as if she hadn't just caught him saying something horrifying. Harold Marlowe is an old man. His health has been declining for years. This is not news to anyone. Her hands curled into fists. And I'm the key to everything? What does that mean? Dorian didn't blink. It means exactly what you think it does. The cold inside her spread. Tell me. He studied her for a long moment before gesturing toward the chair in front of his desk. I'm not sitting, she snapped. A flicker of amusement crossed his face, gone as quickly as it came. Suit yourself. He reached into a drawer, pulling out a sleek black folder. He set it down on the desk, flipping it open with a practiced ease. The first thing she saw was a photograph. A grainy, decades-old image of a man and a woman, sitting too close together in a way that suggested something more than business. Her mother. Her throat tightened. She reached for the photo before she even realized what she was doing. The edges were worn, the ink slightly faded. Her mother looked young, so young, sitting beside a man she had never met but now understood was Harold Marlowe. Dorian's voice was quiet but firm. Your mother and Harold Marlowe had an affair. You are the result of that affair. Her stomach dropped. No. Yes, Dorian said simply. I had it confirmed. She shook her head, the room tilting slightly. That's not possible. It is. He pulled out another set of papers, placing them in front of her. Birth records. Financial transactions. Silent payments from Harold Marlowe that stopped suddenly after a few years, as if he had made a decision to erase her mother from his life entirely. The ground beneath her felt unsteady. Dorian's voice cut through the fog in her mind. You are Harold Marlowe's daughter, Talia. His only illegitimate child. And whether you like it or not, that gives you legal claim to part of his empire. She squeezed her eyes shut for a second, willing herself to wake up from whatever nightmare this was. But when she opened them, the documents were still there. The proof. Her entire life had been a lie. She let out a shaky breath, gripping the back of the chair in front of her. And that's why you married me? Yes. The bluntness of it knocked the air from her lungs. You would have never agreed to this willingly, Dorian said, voice steady, as if he were stating something obvious. So I made sure you had no choice. She inhaled sharply. The room suddenly felt too small. She stopped herself, shaking her head. You manipulated me. I did what was necessary. She let out a bitter laugh. For who? For both of us. The rage simmering inside her threatened to boil over. You don't get to say that. Dorian watched her, unaffected. Would you have married me if I had told you the truth? The question hung between them, sharp as a knife. She hated that the answer was obvious. No. She would have walked away. And Dorian had known that. Her fingers dug into the wood of the chair. So, what? I was a piece in your game? You were the most important piece. Something inside her cracked. And you don't even care, do you? His expression didn't change. Caring is irrelevant. The words were so cold, so matter-of-fact, that it knocked the wind out of her. She stepped back, pulse roaring in her ears. She needed to get out of this room. She needed to breathe. Dorian said nothing as she turned on her heel and walked away. But she felt his eyes on her the entire time. The envelope sat on the desk, thick with papers that spelled out the truth of her existence, but Talia couldn't bring herself to open it. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at it, her hands curled into fists against her lap. The weight of the night pressed against her chest, suffocating, inescapable. She had known, of course, that Dorian was ruthless. That he operated on logic and control rather than sentiment. She had learned that quickly. But she hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected to be nothing more than a tool in his war. Her jaw clenched as her mind replayed the conversation in his office, the way he had laid out the facts like they were just another part of a well-crafted business deal. Her father was Harold Marlowe. A billionaire. A man she had never met, never even thought about, because why would she? Her father had been nothing but a ghost in her life. Now, suddenly, he wasn't. Now, he was the reason Dorian had married her, the reason she was standing in a mansion she didn't belong in, trapped in a situation she never agreed to. Talia pushed herself up from the bed and walked to the desk. She grabbed the envelope and emptied it onto the polished wood surface, watching as photographs, documents, and printed emails scattered in front of her. Talia sat at the desk, documents spread out before her, each one a puzzle piece of a life she had never known. Her hands trembled as she picked up a yellowed letter, the ink slightly faded but still legible. It was dated over 30 years ago, addressed to Harold Marlowe from one of his legal advisors. The subject line made her stomach drop, Final severance agreement, Vera Langdon. She scanned the first few lines, her breath catching as she read the details. Vera had been an executive assistant at one of Marlowe's subsidiaries, a small firm swallowed up by his empire long ago. She had started working there in her early 20s, bright, ambitious, and efficient, qualities that had not gone unnoticed by Harold himself. Talia flipped through a set of internal memos, typed notes detailing late-night meetings, extensive work travel, and the subtle shifts in behavior that indicated something more than professionalism between them. The records weren't scandalous on their own, but combined, they painted a picture she didn't want to see. Her mother had been in love with Harold Marlowe. And for nearly a year, he had strung her along, hiding their relationship behind closed doors and business trips. Her fingers hovered over an old black and white photo of a man and a woman sitting together. Harold Marlowe. Her mother. Her mother looked young, younger than Talia had ever seen her. There was something in the way she leaned toward him, in the way he smiled back at her, a softness that Talia had never associated with the man she had just learned was her father. Her stomach twisted. She picked up another paper. A birth certificate. Her name. Her mother's name. The father's name was blank. She swallowed the lump in her throat and moved on to the next document. Another letter, this one from Vera to Harold, stopped Talia cold. It was short, desperate, the kind of message a person sends when they've run out of options. Harold, I can't do this alone. I need you to at least acknowledge her. I'm not asking for anything more. The response was clipped, emotionless. This matter has been handled. You were compensated generously. There is nothing left to discuss. Talia's vision blurred as she flipped to the next document, a financial ledger listing a lump sum payment to Vera Langdon, followed by a termination notice. A contract was attached, signed by her mother, agreeing never to contact Harold again, never to claim paternity, never to come back. He hadn't just turned his back on them. He had erased them. The last page in the stack was another letter, never sent. Talia recognized her mother's handwriting instantly. I told myself I wouldn't regret you. That I wouldn't regret loving you, even if you never loved me. But I do regret believing, even for a second, that you might have had it in you to be a father. Talia's hands clenched around the paper, her pulse pounding in her ears. Her entire life had been rewritten in the span of an hour. A silence settled over her, thick and suffocating. He had known. Harold Marlowe had always known she existed. She had spent her entire life thinking she had been a mistake, that maybe her mother had never told him. That maybe he had never known she was born. But he had known. And he had chosen to never want her. She pressed a hand to her forehead, inhaling deeply. Dorian had known all of this before she did. He had pieced it together, used it against her, crafted a plan around her existence before she even realized she was part of a game. Her entire life had been decided for her without her knowledge. She let out a bitter laugh. Dorian had orchestrated everything, the marriage, the contract, the money, the deception. He had seen her not as a person but as a move in a long-term strategy, one that involved taking down a man who hadn't spared her a second thought. She reached for the other papers and forced herself to read. Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry. She had been nothing more than an afterthought. And then something clicked inside her. Her hands curled into fists. Wait a minute. I am a billionaire's daughter? An idea started to form. The hours passed in a blur, but she didn't move from the desk. She reread every document, memorized every detail. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed. The house was silent. She exhaled, long and slow. She had been used. It was time to maybe start using this situation to her own benefit. The receptionist at Marlowe Industries barely spared Talia a glance as she walked through the gleaming lobby, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She had expected security to stop her, had braced for some kind of resistance, but Dorian's lawyer had handled everything in advance. The meeting was already on the schedule. Harold Marlowe thought he was walking into a business negotiation. He had no idea what was about to hit him. The elevator ride to the top floor was smooth, the numbers blinking past too quickly. Dorian had offered to come with her, but she had refused. This was her fight. He had played his part in getting her here, but this moment belonged to her alone. The doors opened to a private reception area, sleek and expensive, the kind of place where deals worth billions were made over glasses of scotch. A young assistant in a sharp suit greeted them with a polite but distant smile. "Mr. Marlowe will see you now," he said, leading them down the hall. The office was massive, all floor-to-ceiling windows and dark wood, designed to intimidate. Harold Marlowe sat behind an imposing desk, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his silver hair neatly combed back. He looked exactly like the photographs Talia had spent weeks studying, but in person, he was even colder. His sharp blue eyes flicked from Talia to the lawyer beside her, and then to the folder in her hands. "Miss Langdon, was it?" His voice was smooth but impersonal. "I was under the impression this was a discussion about corporate acquisitions. What exactly am I looking at here?" Talia took a step forward and placed the folder on his desk. "You're looking at proof that I'm your daughter." The air in the room shifted. Harold Marlowe didn't so much as blink. He didn't lean forward, didn't reach for the folder. Instead, he studied her with the kind of measured detachment one might use when evaluating a minor inconvenience. "I don't have a daughter," he said. Talia's fingers twitched at her sides, but she didn't let her expression change. "You do. You've had one for 28 years. And you knew it." Marlowe's eyes flicked toward the lawyer. "This is ridiculous." Dorian's lawyer, a polished man named Silas Hale, remained unfazed. "It's not. Inside that folder is undeniable proof of Miss Langdon's parentage. Financial records of payments made to her mother, Vera Langdon, for several years. A severance package that coincided with her pregnancy. Photographs of them together. And, most importantly, legal documents outlining paternity agreements that were never officially filed." For the first time, something in Harold Marlowe's expression wavered. Not shock, not remorse, just mild irritation, as if this whole situation were nothing more than an administrative error he now had to deal with. "This is absurd," he said. "Even if such payments existed, they do not constitute proof of paternity." Silas reached into his briefcase and pulled out another document, setting it neatly on the desk. "Which is why we've obtained a court order for a paternity test. You can take the test willingly, or we can escalate this to a very public legal battle." Silence stretched between them. Talia refused to look away. Harold finally exhaled, slow and measured, before reaching for the document. He scanned it, his jaw tightening slightly, then leaned back in his chair. "And what is it you want, exactly?" Talia could feel the blood rushing in her ears, but she kept her voice steady. "I want what's mine. My legal inheritance. My rightful recognition as your daughter. Compensation for the years of abandonment." Talia didn't blink. "This is about me reclaiming what was stolen from me. What you threw away." Harold tapped his fingers against the desk. "A court case of this scale would take years." Silas smiled slightly. "Yes. And in those years, every detail of your affair with Vera Langdon would be public knowledge. Every financial statement. Every attempt to cover it up. You've spent decades building your empire. Do you really want to risk its reputation now?" Harold's jaw clenched. Talia leaned forward slightly. "You don't have to acknowledge me as your daughter. You don't even have to pretend to care. But you will compensate me for what you stole." The silence stretched for another moment, then Harold let out a slow, controlled breath. "What are your terms?" Talia's hands curled into fists beneath the desk. The paternity test was done in the most sterile, impersonal setting imaginable. Talia sat across from Harold Marlowe in a private medical facility, a nurse swabbing the inside of her cheek before turning to him to do the same. He barely looked at her, his face unreadable, as if this was nothing more than another task in his carefully structured life. Talia felt nothing as she handed over her sample. No flicker of hope, no deep-seated need for recognition. The test wasn't for her, it was for him. A confirmation of what she had known since the moment she opened those documents. When the results arrived, they were delivered with the same cold efficiency as a business report. 99.9% probability. Harold Marlowe was her father. The doctor explained the statistics, the legal weight of the results, but Talia barely listened. Instead, she watched Harold as he read over the papers, his expression giving nothing away. No shock, no regret, no shift in the way he sat. When he finally folded the results and set them down, he exhaled sharply, as if they were merely an inconvenience. "I assume this is the part where you demand your price," he said. The negotiations were handled in his office, this time with more lawyers present. Harold was known for being ruthless in deals, but Talia didn't flinch. She laid out her terms with precision: financial compensation, legal inheritance rights, and control of Marlowe Technologies. His reaction was immediate. His fingers tapped against the desk, his first sign of emotion. "So, this is about the company," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Talia didn't confirm or deny it. She let him sit with the realization. He leaned back, studying her with the first hint of real interest. "You're smart," he admitted. "Not just throwing out an arbitrary number, not asking for some empty title. You came with a purpose." His gaze flicked to Dorian's lawyer. "This was Vale's idea, wasn't it?" Talia didn't even look at Silas Hale. "This is my inheritance," she said. "It should have been mine before you buried the truth." Harold let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head slightly. "And what do you plan to do with it? Run a tech firm? Or hand it off to Vale so he can finally get what he's wanted all along?" Harold steepled his fingers, his sharp gaze assessing. "And what then? You take the money, the business. What, you expect me to just sign the papers and pretend you don't exist?" He let the silence stretch before continuing. "Are you planning to move into the estate? Change your last name? Let me parade you around as the heir I never knew I had?" His voice carried the slightest edge of mockery. "Is that what this is about?" Talia didn't even hesitate. "None of that." She leaned forward, resting her hands on the desk between them. "I had a great mother. She was enough for both parents. She loved me enough for two people, and I never felt the absence of a father because she was that good." Her voice remained steady, unwavering. "The only thing she couldn't give me was financial stability. And that is where you come in." Harold watched her, his expression impossible to read. "So that's all I am to you? A transaction? That's all you ever made me," she said. "Accept the terms, sign the papers, and you will never hear from me again." Dorian sat across from her, a tumbler of whiskey resting against his fingertips, watching her the way he always did, like she was a problem to be solved. The ink on the agreement had barely dried, but he wasn't looking at the documents. He was looking at her. "You played it well," he said, his voice even. Talia leaned back against the leather chair, her hands loose in her lap. "I learned from the best." A slow, knowing smile ghosted across his face. "You never intended to let me control the deal, did you?" She tilted her head, pretending to consider. "You gave me everything I needed to beat him. You just didn't realize I was going to use it against both of you." Dorian's gaze flicked to the papers between them, the final contract. The one she had spent an entire sleepless night crafting after she learned the truth about her father. The moment she had pieced everything together, she had gone straight to Dorian and laid out her counteroffer. She would help him take down Harold Marlowe, but on her terms. The settlement had been the final masterstroke, her way of ensuring that neither Dorian nor Harold controlled her future. Harold Marlowe had spent decades pretending she didn't exist, and now he was paying for every year he had ignored her. The agreement granted her not only financial compensation for the years of neglect but also full inheritance rights, ensuring that when the time came, she wouldn't need to fight for what was legally hers. But the real victory had been in securing Marlowe Technologies. That had been the key. Dorian could have waited for Harold to die, knowing that as Talia's husband, the company would have eventually fallen into his hands. But Talia had given him another option, one that benefited them both, on her terms. Instead of waiting for an uncertain future, she had presented him with a new contract. He would legally back her in obtaining her rightful settlement, ensuring she received everything she was owed. In return, once she had control over Marlowe Technologies, she would sell it to him, for a price. Dorian had hesitated, but only for a moment. This was his one opportunity to get what he had always wanted, without waiting years for Harold's inevitable demise. He had agreed, and the moment she gained control of the company, she signed it over to him. She walked away a free woman, wealthy, independent, and owing nothing to either of them. The result was exactly what she had wanted. She had her legal recognition. Dorian had his company. And she had walked away with financial independence so staggering that she would never have to work another day in her life. It was over. Dorian studied her for a long moment before setting down his glass. "We make a good team." Talia let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "You mean we make an effective team?" He smirked slightly. "Is there a difference?" She exhaled, glancing down at her hands. "You know there is." Silence stretched between them, thick and charged. Dorian wasn't a man who asked for things. He took them. He strategized, calculated, played the long game until the outcome was in his favor. Which meant the next words out of his mouth weren't an accident. "We could stay married." She looked up sharply. He was calm as ever, but there was something unreadable in his eyes. "A business arrangement, of course. You're wealthy now, but with me, you'd have more than wealth. You'd have influence. And I could use someone like you by my side." Her heart pounded once, hard. The offer was logical. It made sense. They knew each other's strengths. They had just pulled off one of the most seamless power plays imaginable. But she was done being used, even if the deal was one of equals. She smiled, slow and deliberate, before standing. "No, Dorian." He raised a brow, waiting. She straightened her shoulders, feeling the full weight of her victory. "I'm done playing someone else's game." He exhaled through his nose, a quiet laugh. "I thought you might say that." She picked up the divorce papers sitting at the edge of the desk and slid them toward him. "Sign them." Dorian didn't hesitate. He took the pen, signed his name in smooth, effortless strokes, then set it down. And just like that, it was over. The moment Talia finalized her plan, something inside her shifted. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to dream. Not just small, practical dreams, real ones. Where would she go? What kind of life would she build for herself and Oren now that nothing was holding her back? She had always loved the sun, the way warmth felt against her skin, the way the ocean stretched endlessly, promising peace. She started searching for paradise, researching islands with white sand beaches, clear blue water, and a sense of solitude. But it wasn't just about beauty. It had to be a place where Oren could grow up safe, where he could go to a good school, where they could finally stop running. So, she hired a real estate agent, someone discreet, someone who understood that she wasn't just looking for a house, she was looking for freedom. She spent weeks going through listings, flipping through photos of oceanfront villas, tropical hideaways, and sleek modern estates. She let herself picture it, mornings on a sun-drenched balcony, Oren laughing as he ran through the sand, a kitchen where she would cook because she wanted to, not because she had to. She had never had the luxury of choice before. Every apartment she had ever lived in was whatever she could afford, whatever was closest to work, whatever kept them afloat. But now, she could choose. And she did, carefully, deliberately. When she found the island, she knew. It had everything, paradise, but also a future. The kind of place where Oren could grow up happy, where she could finally breathe. Then came the house. A beachfront property, private but not isolated, surrounded by lush greenery and endless ocean views. She had never bought anything like this before, never picked out furniture, never chosen the color of her own walls. It was intoxicating, deciding on soft linen sheets, the perfect couch, the kind of kitchen she actually wanted to cook in. Every choice was hers, not dictated by necessity, not forced by circumstance. And when everything was set, when the paperwork was signed and the house was theirs, she packed their bags. 3 weeks later, Talia stepped off the plane onto sun-warmed pavement, the humid air wrapping around her like a second skin. Oren held her hand, chattering excitedly about the ocean, the palm trees, the sand he had already decided was going to be his new favorite thing. The house sat on a secluded stretch of beach, painted in warm whites and soft blues, with wide windows that let in the endless horizon. It was a house built for peace. For a life free of complications, of power struggles, of men who thought they could dictate her future. She stood in the open doorway, watching Oren run toward the waves, his laughter carried by the wind. She had everything she needed. No more struggles. No more past. Just freedom.